Indicted Fiction, the most untrue crime podcast out there. Everything you're about to hear is fictional, but the feelings you may experience are 100% real. The Case of Adam's Murder, Episode 11, Halloween, recorded the morning of November 1st. Chuck begged me to hang out, so I obliged. He told me to meet him at the park, the one we've been going to since we were kids. I felt more comfortable there than I did back at his place, considering I'm avoiding Joel. When I walked to the park, the sky was gray, but by the time I slipped under the awning covering the picnic tables, it was drizzling. Chuck was already there, a stupid grin on his face. He gave me a much too tight hug and we sat down. I tried to ask about his job, but he didn't seem too keen on talking about it. I hadn't seen anything on the news about the suspected serial killer, aka me. I know I wrote the correct place down. Everyone calls that place Star Bend. I think it's even on the sign, but I've been by so many times I don't even register it anymore. I heard the clerk scream. That must mean she saw the photos. The rain pitter-pattered on the metal awning. It was calming, I'm not gonna lie. I sat on the table resting my feet on the seat as I always do. Chuck sat on the seat below me and kept inching closer to my leg. I kept my knees together, tight, uncomfortable at the possibilities. I think he noticed this, or he was curious what I was looking at on my phone, so he scooted off the seat and plopped down onto the table next to me. I kept checking local news websites in hopes that something would be posted, in hopes that if something was posted, somebody else could come forward with more information, condemning Adam's murderers. I think I checked every 5 minutes. It was really all I could think about. Chuck's words sort of droned in the background of my mind, the forefront taken over by everything else. Finally, Chuck said, "Who are you texting?" Jesus, he irks me. I told him no one, but when I checked my phone after 5 minutes had passed, he asked again. I had to ask him why. His eyebrows scrunched down. He said, no reason, that he was just curious. Yeah, okay. I made up my mind that if he put his arm around me today, I would not allow it. I did not expect what he actually did. There was a period of silence as both of us watched the rain dump on the playground. It thundered on the awning above us, like 100 marching band drummers. It was so quick. I couldn't have stopped it if I tried. He grabbed my cheek and turned my face towards him before kissing me. I think he expected a romantic moment, us kissing while the sound of rain orchestrated around us. It did not go that way. I pulled away, wiping my mouth with my sleeve quickly. "What is wrong with you?" I asked. He looked stunned before the anger set in. "What is wrong with me? What is wrong with you?" "Me? Oh, I don't know, maybe that my brother was brutally murdered and I witnessed it on a USB I found. Oh, and at his funeral, I dropped his fucking cat in the grave and his own fucking coffin crushed the fucking thing to death. And my parents are in a deep state of grief, so far into it that even I, their only living child, can't help them." I didn't say any of this, I just tried to calm him down. My excuses being, I'm not ready for a relationship, I'm still healing. That only made him angrier. He hopped off the table and got in my face saying, "You've been leading me on this whole time." His face was red with anger, well, redder than his ginger face usually is. I just shook my head. Yeah, asking a friend for comfort in a time of need, in a time of grief, is clearly an attempt to lead said friend on romantically. I never would have agreed to hang out these few times had I known he'd react this way. Without Adam here, I guess Chuck feels empowered. He feels that there isn't a barrier between him and I anymore. So I have to become that barrier. I turned to leave. He grabbed my arm. The weight of my pistol, yes, mine. It's no longer Adam's. He gifted it to me. It's mine now. The weight of it sat heavy on my waistline. Could I do it? If he gave me enough reason. I yanked my arm away and walked out into the rain. I didn't look back, but I didn't hear his heavy footfalls behind me either. On my walk back to my place, I realized most kids' Halloween would be over by the time I got to work. 10 p.m. was a long ways away. When I got home, I fell into bed. My mom didn't question it as she knew I was going to be working late. I slept the deepest sleep I've slept in a long time. Surprisingly, I woke up 30 minutes before work, just enough time to get the crap off my face and start my walk to work. I told my mom goodbye and she told me Dad was stuck working late. As a local mechanic, that happened often, especially with the junkers people here bring in. Stepping blindly into a horrific murder scene, a young ex-con, Vicente Vargas, must flee from the police while eluding the real killer who continues to pin more bodies on him in this intricate cat-and-mouse game. Cut off from all friends and family, tried and convicted by the press, Vic must survive on his wits and cunning on the gritty streets of Phoenix, Arizona, long enough to clear his name. Read Elude, Part 1 by Derek Barton, available on Amazon in paperback, audiobook, and ebook. I took the only umbrella we own and started what felt like the longest walk I've ever taken. It was dark and I hate walking at night, but there I was, fighting the wind and rain to go stock some carrots and celery. By the time I got to work, my jacket was soaked. I stripped it off and threw it in my locker, hoping it would dry by morning. The night was off to a good start. Jamal greeted me, nice and dry and warm from his car's heater and heated seats, not to mention the nice metal roof he got to sit under. In that moment, I would have licked the bottom of his shoe just to sit in a warm car for 5 minutes. He noticed my gloomy countenance and surprisingly asked what was wrong instead of assuming it was simply the bad weather putting me in this bad mood. Instead of just complaining about the weather, I felt comfortable enough to open up. As I mopped the produce section and he changed out the empty plastic bag rolls for big fat ones, I told him about Chuck. "So you've known this boy a long time?" he asked. "Sadly, yes," I answered, watching a mysterious red stain get soaked up into the mop. He shook his head. "Oh no, don't let him get to you. He's just sour." Yeah, now that I think about it, Chuck did taste kind of sour. I told Jamal how I couldn't believe Chuck was so quick to make a move on me. He told me that's just how some guys are. They're blinded by their own needs. All kinds of people can be that way. I think that's true, and honestly the statement has me wondering a few things. Am I blinded by what I want? Are my parents struggling because of what I think of as my needs? I wish I could just let it all go, but I have a feeling I'm so close. Jamal told me to go on a walk around the store with him. He needed to see what all needed to be done across departments. I followed, carrying his clipboard and marking things here, writing a note there. We passed the candy aisle, and I had seen Jamal do a double take. A few steps later, he said, "Why don't you go finish up the job Bella was supposed to do?" He walked me back to the candy aisle and pointed to a cart full of bags of candy. "Those bags accidentally got left in the back. All I need you to do is put them on the shelf in the right place." He was smiling oddly, but I shrugged my shoulders, gave him the clipboard, and walked down the aisle. There was someone in a costume looking at the big bags of chocolate. It was a guy. He was wearing one of those spandex skeleton costumes, and when he turned, I saw his face was painted with jarringly white and black paint. Even under the paint, I noticed he was cute. The guilt I felt, just having told Chuck I wasn't ready for a relationship and seeing this guy that made my heart flutter. Was I a hypocrite? I don't think so, but I really did hope this guy would talk to me. There I was, my stunted black ponytail still damp with rainwater and matted down on my forehead. And this guy says, "So your costume is a beautiful girl working in a place she deserves to never have to see again?" Longest pickup line ever. But it worked. I thought for a minute, trying to come up with something to say back, so I said, "And your costume must represent the stock market?" As soon as the words left my mouth, I wondered why I said it. What the fuck is wrong with me? I didn't think he'd laugh or even smirk at the stupid joke. He laughed. It wasn't like bend over and slap your knee laugh, but it was still cute. I really shouldn't be gushing like this, but who else can I tell? I think it's too soon to tell my parents or Chantel, and Chuck, well, he just wouldn't be happy for me. For obvious reasons. He asked me what kind of candy he should get for his brother. I guess the kid is sick and can't go trick-or-treating. So his name is Lenny, by the way. What a dorky name for such a cute guy. So Lenny is getting a bag of candy for his brother. He told the kid he would go trick-or-treating for him, but Lenny thought this would be quicker. I told him he couldn't go wrong with a bag of chocolate candies as long as the kid doesn't have a nut allergy. He snagged a bag from off the shelf and thanked me for helping him. He said, "I don't have much to offer in return for your help, but here's my number." He took the pen from behind my ear and gently grabbed my arm, scribbling his digits onto my wrist. Lenny laughed and said, "Just don't wash your arm until you text me." And when he winked, he said, "I'm Lenny Lenniston." I said my name, and of course he asked if I ever played the drums. I laughed and said no, as if I've never heard the joke before. He told me he had to go and made sure to tell me to text him when I got off work. I told him I would. He walked down the aisle, and I'm not going to lie. I watched him go, but that's when I saw him. There Chuck stood at the end of the aisle. He glared at Lenny as he passed, having to look up at someone for once, as Lenny is a tall guy. I sensed that he had been standing there for a while, long enough to at least know Lenny had hit on me. I didn't feel safe. He flicked his gaze to me, staring deep into my soul. I made a run for it. I speed walked down the aisle, and as I went, I heard Chuck's shoes squeak on the linoleum as he followed me. I sped up, not wanting to run through the store. Oh, to have seen Jamal, or any other coworker for that matter. Shit, I would have taken the company of any customer, but it seemed as if the store was vacant, save for me and Chuck. I just had to get to the break room. The front exit was actually closer, but the idea of being out in the dark parking lot with Chuck terrified me. I weaved through clothing racks trying to lose him. His wet shoes gave away his location as he neared me. My calves burned. I wasn't used to speed walking for this long. I wanted to break out in a full sprint, to make it to the break room and lock myself in the employee bathroom. There had to be somebody else in this store, I thought. I came across no one. Those silver doors shone in the fluorescent lights like beacons of safety. Seeing no one else around, I ran, closing the distance between me and the doors. and threw myself onto them, practically falling into the break room. Jamal sat at a table looking relaxed while staring at his phone with his legs crossed comfortably. He looked up to me with wide eyes, preparing to ask what was wrong when Chuck busted through the doors. Immediately, Jamal was on his feet and yelling. He got between me and Chuck, pushing me back away from the doors. Chuck was surprised, obvious by the stunned look on his face. But when he saw me, he tried to push past Jamal. I never saw Jamal as the violent type, but when he bared his teeth and shoved Chuck with both hands, I knew he saw me as a daughter that needed protecting. Chuck fell out the doors and from the sounds of it, landed on his back. I couldn't see from behind Jamal. He was yelling at Chuck at the top of his lungs and security rushed over. I approached the doors, watching as they dragged him out. Jamal made sure I was okay, his demeanor instantly returning to the man I know. We sat down and talked about it over some coffee, and he told me he would stick with me all shift. "Do you have a lift?" he asked as we walked back out onto the floor. I shook my head. "No, and my bike is broken. I'll take you home," he said, giving me a one-armed hug around the shoulders. The store was definitely more fun away from the produce aisle. I followed Jamal around, and we finished up his checklist. It felt kind of nice to be walking around with the head honcho. We had lunch. Well, the kind of lunch you have at 2 a.m. He asked me how stalking the candy went before Chuck showed up. I knew he did it on purpose, so I showed him my arm and said, "His name is Lenny." He laughed and told me he had a feeling it would work. He also told me I need to stay away from boys like Chuck, because he's exactly that, just a boy, and boys don't know how to treat women. It was rare to meet someone so blunt, so candid, but I thoroughly enjoyed his company. I was replacing garbage bags in the cans around the store, and when I got to the front of Supermart, I saw Chuck was staring through the front windows. I didn't want to act scared as we held eye contact. I wanted to appear strong, but I was shaking in my boots. Well, I was in tennis shoes, but you know the phrase. I looked away, putting a bag in the can and wrapping the edge over. When I looked up, he was gone. Jamal came over and asked how I was doing, startling me. When I jumped, he jumped, and I felt bad. I told him it was just nerves. The hours seemed to pass like slugs on concrete. I never worked a late shift, and I don't think I would ever do it again. I was sitting in a chair at the closed sandwich shop, practically falling asleep, when Jamal told me it was time to go. I felt guilty, but I could see the pity and understanding in his eyes. He led me to the back of the store, saying he didn't want to leave out the front. I agreed. Walking through the parking lot felt like a scene in a horror movie, where the music is building and growing louder, and you know the killer is right around the corner, but the character can't seem to figure it out. The parking lot's lights only illuminated circles directly below their bulbs. There was plenty of pitch-black space. Jamal got into a little blue car. It had brand new tires, since his last set were slashed, and a sticker of the state of Texas on the back window. When I got in, I saw on the dash that he indeed did have heated seats. I don't think I've ever punched a button so fast. He turned on the radio, turning it to a country music station, and backed out of the parking space. The sense of relief I felt leaving that parking lot was immense, as if I'd lost 50 pounds within a second. Jamal asked me where to go, and I guided him to my apartment. When we got halfway there, I realized Chuck could be there, waiting. Jamal must have read my mind, as he said he would get out and walk me to my door. He asked if my parents would be home, and I told him they should be. My dad was working late, but he should have been home. He pulled up, parked, and walked me to my door without an issue, but when I opened my door, all the lights were on. My mom was in the kitchen on the phone. She was crying. Jamal saw this and decided to invite himself in with me. She saw me and walked over silently. She was listening to a voice I could barely hear on the phone. With trembling hands, she gave me a hug. My stomach was filled with lead. I wanted to ask where Dad was, but I was scared. Was I prepared for the answer? "Your father is in the hospital," my mother said, pressing her cell phone to her chest as she said it. Jamal and I gasped. I asked if he was all right, but my mom held up a finger, listening. She hung up shortly after, sat Jamal and I down without even asking who this stranger was. She took my hands in hers and said, "We're going to visit him, but we have to be strong. The doctor says he's very hurt." I nodded. An anxious feeling built up in my gut, so similar to the feeling I had when 2, then 3, then 4 nights had passed without Adam. She looked to Jamal and asked if he'd like to come with. He shook his head. I could understand why he didn't want to come with. So we went outside, only to discover our van's tires had been slashed. It was Mom's day with the hunk of junk, as they took turns carpooling. Jamal overheard my mother cry out and ran over from his car. He offered to drive us to the hospital, and my mother thanked him. It was rare to see her take any sort of help, but I'm glad she took Jamal's. The sun wouldn't be rising for a few more hours as we drove over the river. My mother was completely silent, and I tried to think about what she'd be thinking about. Probably money. Not in a selfish way. I'm sure her first priority was my father, but I had overheard them talking about the cost of Adam's funeral. Funerals aren't cheap. Hospital bills aren't cheap. And without any knowledge of what injuries my father had sustained, I was clueless to know how bad life was about to get. I hate hospitals. I think that's a common feeling for most people. Hospitals are really only there after bad things happen. Jamal stayed in the car while my mother and I poured out into the rain. I thanked him on my way out, noticing how he averted his eyes from the hospital building. I had to wonder if his daughter had been taken here, with everyone hoping she would survive, only to die in a hospital bed. I can't imagine how many people have died in this hospital. We rushed in, catching the eyes of the receptionist and the surprisingly full waiting room. Apparently the receptionist had been the one on the phone with my mom when I got home. She directed us down the hall and to the left. As we walked down the hall, I noticed how close his room was to the emergency entrance. It must have been bad. Tubes and wires snaked around my father's face and body. Bloody gauze constricted him from moving. His closed eyes told me he wouldn't be moving for a while anyway. The room clicked and beeped over the sound of the heating duct above my head. It was bad. Thanks for listening. Be sure to tune in next Friday for Adam's Murder, Episode 12, Fear. Adam's Murder is up for pre-order. Order signed copies on my website, paperbacks on Amazon, and ebooks on Barnes & Noble. If you'd like to read the transcribed audio diary of Abigail Drummer, go to my website, authoralyannapoe.com/blog. Each episode is posted on my blog under Indicted Fiction.